My parents gave away my inheritance to my sister's husband, so I let them go bankrupt while I quietly bought the house they were just evicted from him, a 29-year-old guy. And my parents have always been more interested in my sister's happiness than mine. Lisa was always the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Growing up, I watched as she got praise for every little thing: her grades, her friendships, her ability to just exist in the world with this effortless charm. Meanwhile, I was the invisible one, the one who could be doing well and still feel like an afterthought. It wasn't even about big moments, it was in the small things. My achievements were always overshadowed by hers, and I couldn't understand why. I remember one time, I made it into a great university, a huge win for me. My parents didn't even mention it. They were too busy celebrating Lisa's perfect report card, which, to be honest, was no surprise. I worked hard to get that acceptance, stayed up late studying, made sacrifices, and still nothing. No congratulations, no acknowledgement, just a brush off. It wasn't malicious, it was like they genuinely didn't even notice. Like I was background noise to them, while Lisa was the lead role in their lives. Every year, it was the same thing. Family gatherings. Everything was about Lisa, her latest accomplishments, her social life, her engagement announcements. Meanwhile, I'd sit there quietly, trying not to feel the sting. I remember once, after I got a promotion at work, I told my parents about it, thinking maybe this time they'd see me. But no, it was the same thing again. They hardly reacted. Instead, they went on about how excited they were for Lisa and her fiancé's wedding plans. It hit me like a ton of bricks that day. No matter what I did, I'd never be enough. My entire life, I had tried to live up to this standard I thought was normal, only to realize that my value was always measured by how I stacked up to Lisa, and I never did. I remember standing there, my parents' half-hearted congratulations ringing in my ears. As I watched them gush over Lisa's engagement, it was like I was invisible all over again. And I think that's when I started to believe it. Maybe I was invisible to them. I never expected things to get worse. They did. My parents had always promised that their inheritance would be split evenly between Lisa and me. I remember them saying it so many times, almost like it was a rule, a promise etched in stone. We're a family, they'd say. Everything is fair. Everything will be shared. I believed them, or at least I tried to. For years, I thought that once they were gone, there would finally be some balance. It was all I had to hold on to, the thought that one day I'd be treated like an equal. But I should have known better. It all started with the house. When my parents announced that they were giving Lisa a significant portion of their inheritance to help her and her husband, I was stunned. But I kept quiet. They told me it was for their new beginnings, for their future, and that I shouldn't be upset. My heart sank. How could they say that, knowing how much I'd worked, how much I'd sacrificed to get where I was? And yet all they could see was Lisa and her perfect life. But it wasn't just the money. It wasn't just that Lisa got more than me. It was that they gave her everything. Their house, their savings, everything they'd worked their whole lives for, it all went to her. I wasn't consulted. No discussions. It was just decided like I didn't matter. When I asked my mom about it, she brushed me off, saying that Lisa needed it more, that she was struggling. And the worst part? They didn't even try to hide it. I remember sitting there in the living room, listening to them talk about how much they owed Lisa for the years of sacrifice she had made. And what about me? I had been the one who worked 2 jobs to get through college. I had been the one who showed up when they needed help. But none of that mattered. I was nothing more than a backup plan. An afterthought. The worst came when my parents said they didn't have enough left for me to even pay off my student loans. I laughed bitterly, swallowing the anger I felt building up inside. I wanted to scream, to tell them everything they had done to me over the years. But instead, I just nodded, and that's when it hit me. I was never going to be enough for them. I'd spent my life chasing their approval, but I was just another name on the list. And Lisa would always be their priority. But something in me shifted. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a quiet resolve. If they weren't going to recognize me, then I wasn't going to fight for them anymore. I wasn't going to be the good son anymore. I knew what I had to do. I was still reeling from the fact that my parents had handed Lisa everything. But then came the news that completely shattered what little was left of my trust in them. They sold the house. The house I grew up in. The house where I'd spent my entire childhood and my memories. My family's history, all of it gone. They didn't even give me a heads up. It was just an offhand remark one evening when I came over for dinner. "Oh, by the way, we've sold the house," my dad casually said between bites of his dinner. "Lisa and her husband are going to start a business with the proceeds, and we're downsizing." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what was worse, the fact that they had sold the house without telling me, or the fact that it was going to Lisa and her husband, who didn't need it. They were fine. They were always fine. I couldn't hold it together. "Wait, what?" I blurted out, hoping I'd heard him wrong. "You sold the house? Without even talking to me?" My voice cracked, the anger rising in my throat. "Calm down," my mom chimed in, dismissing me with a wave. "It's just a house. We're going to be fine, and Lisa really needs it." I felt a sickening rage building up inside me, but I couldn't even process it properly. I just stared at them, my parents, the people who raised me, and I realized something awful. They didn't see me. Not really. I was just a side character in the story they had created with Lisa as the protagonist. Everything they did, every decision, every little moment, they had all been about her. And I was left to pick up the scraps. That night, I went home and sat in my room staring at the wall. The house I had loved, the one with its creaky floors and the old tree out back, was gone. All those memories gone. And for what? To help Lisa and her husband start yet another project they didn't need? The irony was crushing. They had everything, and I was left with nothing. I couldn't stop thinking about how I'd been pushed aside for my whole life. This wasn't just about the house. It was about everything every time I'd been overlooked. Dismissed, made to feel like I was the lesser son. It had all led to this moment. But there was something else I was starting to feel now. A spark of cold satisfaction. A realization that maybe, just maybe, I could make them feel what I'd been feeling for years. I didn't know how, but I knew I'd find a way. The days after the house was sold passed in a blur of numbness. I went to work, did my usual routine, but I was hollow inside. The anger was still there, but now it was joined by a heavy sadness, a grief I didn't know how to handle. I didn't just miss the house, I missed the idea of family. The family I thought I had. The one I had worked so hard to be a part of, to be seen in. But all that was left was a gaping void where love and loyalty should have been as the weeks went by. Things started to get worse for my parents. They couldn't keep up with their expenses after selling the house, and I could see them spiraling. I heard it from my mom first, on one of those rare phone calls when she'd actually pick up. "We might have to sell the car too," she said, her voice distant. "Things are tight, and your dad's been out of work for a while." Could hear the stress in her tone, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for them. I should have, but I didn't. The truth was, they were only in this mess because of their own decisions. They'd put all their faith into Lisa and her husband, giving them everything: money, time, their own home, while ignoring their own financial instability. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just numb, watching them unravel from the sidelines like I had no part in this, like it didn't even matter. But it wasn't just that they were struggling financially. It was how they handled it. They never once called me for help, not even when they were on the brink of losing everything. Instead, they called Lisa. She was the one who got all their attention, all their care. She was the one who mattered to them when things got tough. And I hated it. I watched my parents try to stay afloat, sending me the occasional text asking if I could loan them a little or help them out. And every time I read one of those messages, I felt a sickening twinge in my gut. How could they have the nerve to ask for my help after everything they had done? After they handed my future away like it didn't matter? I started to pull back even more. I didn't respond to their calls. I didn't answer their texts. I felt like I was finally giving them a taste of what it felt like to be ignored, to be the last option. But the hardest part was seeing them struggle so hard and knowing they would never come to me for real help. They were too proud. And Lisa? She was too busy to care. And then one day I got a call that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon when my mom called, and this time, she sounded desperate, something I hadn't heard from her in years. "I don't know what to do," she said, her voice shaking. "We're really in trouble. Your father's job isn't going well, and the bills are piling up. We might have to declare bankruptcy if we can't get the money to cover the mortgage this month." I was sitting in my car, parked outside of my office, when I heard those words. The weight of them hit me hard, but for some reason, I didn't feel the pity or the sympathy I thought I would. Instead, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, a feeling I couldn't shake. How did it feel, I wondered, to be at the mercy of someone you've hurt? To be the one asking for help after you've spent your life ignoring the person who would have given you anything? "I'm sorry, but I don't have that kind of money, Mom," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "You need to talk to Lisa. She's the one you've been supporting all these years. I'm sure she can help." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the weight of her realization. She'd always seen me as the backup, the one who would just quietly be there when things went wrong. But now, when they needed me most, I was done. I wasn't going to step in and save them. "Not anymore. Please," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm begging you. We don't know where else to turn." Something inside me snapped. I realized then that I wasn't just angry anymore. I wasn't just hurt. I was done. I'd spent years bending over backward, trying to be the son they would never fully appreciate, and now they were asking me for help. After everything they'd done to me? After giving Lisa everything and leaving me with nothing? "No," I said firmly. And I hung up before she could say anything more. It felt like a relief, I just severed the last chain holding me to this toxic relationship. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to make them see me. I wasn't trying to prove myself. I wasn't going to be their safety net anymore. But even as I walked away, something else was beginning to form in the back of my mind. A plan. A way to make them feel the sting of their betrayal. But in a way they'd never expect. Quiet, calculated, I didn't know what it would look like yet. But I knew it was coming. It didn't take long for things to start unraveling after that phone call. My parents hit a point where their financial situation became undeniable, and the reality of their choices finally sank in. The moment they missed a mortgage payment, I knew it was only a matter of time before they were evicted. I had been watching from a distance, feeling detached but oddly calm. The same parents who had never valued me were now facing the consequences of their own poor decisions. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to feel bad for them. My mom called again a week later, her voice hollow, as if she knew I wouldn't respond the way I used to. Being evicted," she said, almost whispering. "We're not sure what we're going to do. We don't have anywhere to go." For a moment, I felt a flicker of something inside me. It wasn't pity, it was just the realization that my parents were now where I had always been. The neglected child. The one left behind. And this time, I wasn't there to save them. "I'm sorry," I said, and I could hear my voice wavering. But I refused to let the emotion take over. "You made your choices. This is what happens when you rely on someone who doesn't have your best interests at heart." There was a long silence on the other end, and then my mom's voice broke. "Lisa's not helping us either. We... We thought she would, but she's too busy with her own life." She sounded defeated. And for the first time, I almost felt like I could see them for who they really were. Two people who had never truly learned how to manage their own lives without leaning on others. But I wasn't their safety net anymore. I had to keep reminding myself of that. I couldn't help but picture the scene at their home, the empty boxes, the heavy feeling of finality in the air as they packed their things. They were losing everything they had built for themselves. And I knew that a part of them was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, their favoritism toward Lisa had cost them their relationship with me and their stability. And then came the day. They were officially evicted. I saw the moving truck outside their house when I drove by on my way to work. The front door was open, and my parents were there, standing in the doorway with nothing but a few bags of clothes and a pile of boxes. The feeling I had was complicated. Part of me wanted to reach out to offer help. But the other part of me, the part that had been bruised and overlooked for years, felt a cold satisfaction. I slowed down as I passed their house, watching them from a distance. They didn't even look at me. They didn't expect me to stop. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't expect to be there for them either. They had ignored me for so long, treated me like an afterthought. And now, they were facing the same neglect they had imposed on me. But that was the last time I saw them at that house. Because the next time, I would see them, I'd be the one holding all the cards by the time my parents were living out of boxes in cheap motels. I had already started putting my plan into motion. It wasn't impulsive. It had been brewing quietly for months, like a seed taking root in the darkest corner of my mind. While they were busy lamenting over Lisa and her husband, scrambling for solutions they refused to consider themselves, I was quietly preparing. I had been saving, calculating, and watching the perfect moment unfold. And now it had come. I remember sitting in my apartment one night, staring at the documents on my desk. Bank statements, property listings. Legal Forms. I had been researching how to quietly buy the house my parents had been evicted from. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very home they had given away without a second thought. The house where I had grown up feeling invisible would now be mine. And they would never know it was me. Not yet. I could still picture the look on their faces when they realized they had nowhere to go. I knew exactly how that sense of helplessness felt because I had felt it my whole life, except now it was my turn to watch. And I would watch, silently, calmly, patiently. I told no one. Not a friend, not a coworker. This was mine, and it had to stay that way. Every email I sent, every form I filled out, every step I took toward securing the house was done with meticulous care. It wasn't about revenge in a flashy, vindictive wit. It was about control, about balance, about showing them in the most subtle, devastating way that their favoritism had consequences. I remember the night I finalized everything. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the signed papers, and a shiver ran down my spine. The house would be mine. The very house they thought they could toss aside like an old toy. The thought was intoxicating not just for the sense of power, but for the justice in it. After years of being invisible, ignored, and undervalued, I was finally going to be the one holding the power. And yet as I sat there was a sliver of doubt that cut through the excitement. When I finally told them, how would they react? Would they even understand why I did it? Or would they just see it as another act of cruelty? I didn't know. And part of me couldn't wait to find out. A few days after I finalized the purchase, I couldn't stop thinking about my parents. Not because I cared in the old way, but because I wanted to watch the fallout, quietly, from a distance. They were at rock bottom now, truly and completely. No house, no savings, no fallback. Their pride was gone, replaced by panic and despair. It was gut-wrenching to witness. I got a call from my mom late one night. Her voice was shaky, almost unrecognizable. We don't know what to do anymore, she whispered. We have nothing, and Lisa. Lisa can't help us. We're so sorry. Please, we don't know where to turn. For a moment, I felt the tiniest flicker of guilt. This was my parents, after all. But it was fleeting, quickly replaced by the memory of years of neglect. Years of feeling invisible while Lisa basked in their attention. I remembered every time they dismissed my accomplishments, every time they chose her over me. Every time I swallowed my anger and tried to be the good son they seemed to need but never truly saw. I could hear the despair in my mom's voice as she continued, rambling about bills, about eviction notices, about how they might have to live in a motel for weeks. Their desperation was palpable through the phone, a raw human vulnerability that made my chest tighten. But I couldn't step in. I refused to step in. I hung up the phone and sat in silence, the apartment dark except for the faint glow of my laptop. I thought about the years of emotional neglect, of favoritism that had left me hollow, and then the thought struck me, sharp and intoxicating. They had no one left but themselves. I had been sidelined my whole life, but now they were powerless without me. And the very thing they had thrown away, the house. The stability was already slipping quietly into my hands. It was a cruel satisfaction, but it was also a moment of clarity. The people who had ignored me, The people who had built their lives around Lisa were finally learning a lesson. And yet I couldn't shake the unease creeping at the edges of my mind. When the moment came to reveal my role in the house, would they hate me? Would they even understand why I did it? I shook my head and stood up, gripping the edge of my desk. I had made my choice. There was no turning back. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I decided it was finally time. My parents had no idea, of course. They thought the house had slipped completely through their fingers, and Lisa was too busy with her own life to notice. I called them over, telling them there was something important I wanted to show them. The air was thick with tension. I could almost hear my own pulse in the quiet of the house. When they arrived, their eyes widened as they stepped inside. This is the house? My dad stammered, glancing around, recognizing the old creaky floors, the familiar scent of polished wood, and the faint smell of the garden outside. My mom's hands flew to her mouth, and I could see her shaking, a mixture of disbelief and fear in her eyes. But how? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm, measured. I bought it, I said simply. Every bit of it. The house you sold, the one you thought you'd lost. It's mine now. They froze. My dad's face went pale, and my mom sank slowly into the armchair, unable to look at me. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the rain tapping against the windows. You what? My dad finally managed to choke out, his voice barely audible. I met their eyes steadily. Letting the weight of my words sink in, I watched you struggle, Mom. I watched you make choices that ignored me every single time. And now I have this. Quietly, calmly, without fanfare. You have nothing, and yet you never even considered me. Maybe now you understand how it feels to be left out. Tears welled up in my mom's eyes, and I could see the dawning realization in both their faces. They had underestimated me for decades. They had assumed I would always be the overlooked son, the one who bent over backward for them without recognition. But I hadn't just stepped out of the shadows. I had taken control in the quietest, most devastating way possible. My mom whispered brokenly, We didn't mean for it to get this far. I shook my head slowly. It didn't get this far. You did this to yourselves. Every choice, every act of favoritism, every dismissal, you built this. And now, it's the consequence. They sat there in stunned silence, finally understanding that I wasn't just angry. I had outmaneuvered them in the only way that truly mattered. And in that quiet, heavy pause, I realized the game had shifted. I was no longer the ignored son. I was the one holding the cards. After that confrontation, the room was thick with tension. My parents didn't speak for a long time, and honestly, I didn't expect them to. I let them sit with it. Let them absorb the reality that their decisions had consequences they couldn't fix with apologies or excuses. It was almost poetic, decades of favoritism, neglect, dismissal, finally coming back to them in the quietest, most cutting way possible. My mom finally spoke, her voice trembling. We're so sorry. We never meant for it to be this way. But the words sounded hollow, like trying to patch a hole in a dam after the water had already escaped. I wanted to feel some relief, maybe even forgiveness, but all I felt was clarity. I didn't owe them closure. They had spent my entire life denying me, and now I had nothing to give them but the truth. You didn't see me for who I was, said quietly, letting each word hang in the air. You chose Lisa over me at every turn. You ignored my accomplishments, my needs, my life. And now, this is the result. Their eyes filled with shame, and for the first time, I could see the weight of their mistakes. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't lashed out. I hadn't humiliated them in front of anyone. I had simply taken control in a way they couldn't anticipate. The power shift was complete, and it felt like the sweetest form of retribution, quiet, precise, undeniable. I walked through the house, touching the familiar walls and floors that had meant so much to me growing up. The smell of the wooden staircase, the creak of the floorboards, even the faint scent of the garden outside, it all felt like reclaiming a part of myself that had been ignored for too long. This wasn't just about property. It was about finally being seen, finally being acknowledged, and finally being free from the weight of their favoritism. My parents stayed in the living room, silent and broken, and I realized something important. I didn't have to hate them to win. I didn't need to shout or prove myself with anger. I simply needed to step out of their world long enough to let them feel what they had done in doing so. I had reclaimed my own life. As I closed the door behind me that night, I felt a strange peace settle over me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just free. In the weeks after the house officially became mine, life settled into a strange rhythm. My parents were still reeling, living in cramped apartments and trying to figure out what to do with themselves. But I didn't involve myself. For the first time in my life, I felt a distance from them that wasn't painful, it was liberating. I could go about my days without the weight of their favoritism pressing down on me. Without having to compete for attention or validation, I walked through the rooms of the house frequently, sometimes just sitting on the worn couch, letting the memories wash over me. This was my space now, my sanctuary, and it felt surreal. The scent of the old wood, the familiar creak of the stairs, the sunlight filtering through the living room windows, it all felt like reclaiming pieces of a life I'd been denied. I realized that this quiet victory wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about finally being acknowledged in a way my parents had never done. Every so often, I'd think about my parents calling Lisa for help, only to be met with excuses and avoidance. Part of me almost pitied them, but not enough to step back in. I had learned the hard way that some relationships, even family ones, are toxic by nature. I could sympathize without sacrificing myself, and that, more than anything else, felt empowering. I started focusing on my own life work, friends, hobbies that I had neglected over the years while trying to fit into the mold my parents had built for me. For the first time, I made decisions entirely for myself, free from their judgment or expectations. I began to feel a sense of closure that I hadn't thought possible. One night, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I realized how far I'd come. The anger had faded into quiet strength. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had justice, and that was enough. I had survived their favoritism, their manipulation, and their disregard, and I had emerged stronger. And in that calm after the storm, I knew something important. I was finally free to live a life that was mine, completely on my own terms. I never expected to feel this sense of peace. For years, I had carried the weight of being the overlooked, dismissed, and second-best child. Every birthday, every graduation, every little achievement had been filtered through the lens of Lisa's accomplishments. I had spent decades chasing approval I would never get, hoping for validation from parents who had no capacity to give it. And now, it was gone. Not them. Exactly, they were still there, but the hold they had over me had completely dissolved. I walked through the house one last time that evening, letting my fingers trace the banister and the edges of the door frames I had once thought of as mine but never really was. The garden outside, wild and overgrown, smelled of rain and earth, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an intruder in my own life. I was finally the protagonist, not just a background character in someone else's story. I thought about my parents, about all the times they had brushed me off, about every moment I had been invisible. And I realized something important. Their favoritism, their negligence, their selfishness, it wasn't about me. It was about them, their inability to see beyond their own preferences and biases. I couldn't change them, and I didn't need to. My revenge, quiet and precise, had given me the closure I needed. And Lisa, she would continue her life, unaware of the full impact of her parents' choices. Just as I had once been unaware of my own worth. But I no longer needed her approval either. I had learned that family could fail you in the worst ways in that sometimes. The best response isn't confrontation or anger, but reclaiming your own life quietly and decisively. As I closed the front door that night, I felt the finality of it. I had taken back what was mine in every sense that mattered. I was no longer the overlooked son, the backup plan, the invisible one. I had been tested, pushed to my limits, and finally, I had emerged stronger, and in that moment, I understood the last lesson they had unknowingly taught me. Your family may never see you, but you don't need them to define your worth. You define it yourself. I stepped onto the porch, breathing in the crisp night air, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly free.